The holidays are a time to give thanks. In the U.S., they're also a time to create waste. In 2016, on Thanksgiving, Americans threw away the equivalent of 6 million turkeys. That's like throwing $293 million in the garbage. And processing all that discarded turkey spewed the same amount of pollution into the air as driving across the U.S. 800,000 times. In Summit County, recycling is a battle. We have some of the lowest recycling rates in the state, and Colorado has some of the lowest rates in the nation. But why? What is keeping an otherwise progressive and forward-thinking community from reducing, reusing, and recycling? At the start of the holiday season, Krystal 93 sat down with County Commissioner Thomas Davidson and Assistant County Manager Thad Noll to learn more about recycling in Summit County and learn what you can do to keep this mountain town as clean as the day you came here. Phil Lindeman with Krystal 93 News, and I am here today with Thomas Davidson, County Commissioner, and Thad Noll, Assistant County Manager, and we are discussing trash and of course recycling, which of course is a bigger and a little bit more complicated topic than I think people give them credit. So guys, thanks for coming in today. I appreciate you making time to talk trash.
You bet, Phil.
Happy to be here.
Okay, and I wanted to start real quick with something that we were discussing even before we started, the difference between recycling and diversion, because those aren't exactly the same thing, but we hear them almost used interchangeably. So tell me, what's the difference?
I would say the biggest difference what we've got here is diversion is the overall goal of keeping things out of the landfill, keeping them from being buried in the ground. And that can be anything from recycling, a giant piece of that equation. It also includes keeping things out in the first place by reuse. Packaging that can be reused versus recycled is a lot more valuable, takes less resources, takes less energy to produce, and ultimately creates less waste in the stream. So recycling is a critical piece of diversion, but it's only one small piece.
Yeah, and like we were talking, like diversion, an example of that is, say you get a box from Amazon, and then you use that box to, store stuff around home, or maybe send a box to a friend of yours. That's diversion.
Right. There are things that we are doing, and there are more things that we could do that, at least in the business, the lingo is, that's not recycling, right? Your newspapers, you recycle, right? They're going to get sent somewhere and turned back into newspapers again. But diversion could be an example where it doesn't even get to the landfill in the first place, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so recycling is more than what people think of as the reduce, reuse, and send your newspaper off to a recycling plant. Let's talk a little bit about how recycle and diversion looks in Summit County. Now, we've got the landfill right outside of Keystone. If you're heading out skiing this week, you will drive right past it on your way. But that recently went through a change. It is not just a landfill. It even went through a name change. Describe a little bit about how the landfill and the and diversion works here in Summit County.
We're excited because our scrap, as we call it, the Summit County Resource Allocation Park, is a whole lot more than the dump. It includes the landfill, and if you drive up there, you'll see that the operation of burying things in the ground is certainly a part of it. But I think most people are really surprised when they get up there to see that that's only a tiny fraction of the space that we use up there to divert appliances, concrete, asphalt, rocks, appliances, composting.
I was going to say,
composting is now a big part of what we're doing up there, right?
Yeah, and I remember when I was looking into it a little bit, I actually made one of my first visits to the scrap ever to drop off some old printers not long ago, and I saw the compost part.
Right, and that's really important because one of the things that we want to do and do more of is prevent things going into the landfill that produce methane. And one of the things that produces a lot of methane is food scraps and other carbon-based, if you will, things that we want to get rid of. And so one of the opportunities we have to really improve our recycling rate, our diversion rate, is increasing our composting operation.
Okay, so recycling is really just expanding and getting a little bit more than, like we were saying, just simply tossing your newspaper or your used Coke can in a bin where somebody will take it. Summit County, of course, along with scrap, that's another new addition, a relatively new addition. What are some other things that Summit County has been doing lately to encourage recycling or to maybe get a little more modern with recycling?
Oh, great question. As some of you may remember who are here locally, we had some financial issues last year with funding the recycling because it's based on dollars coming in to bury trash. We found people are happy to pay for getting rid of trash, but unhappy about paying to get rid of recycling. So we were in a conundrum of what to do with that. So we've been looking at lots of new things that we could be doing, but that we don't have the finances right now to do. And I think the big item that we could really get at would be food scraps, as Thomas was saying.
Yeah. Another thing that we're fortunate that we've got a place to sell glass, right? The important thing with glass is keeping it out of a single stream. Glass contaminates a lot of other recycling. So another thing that we're interested in doing is improving that service. That takes funding that we don't have right now, but it's something that we know and have identified, and the consultant that we've been using to help advise us with regards to what all we do in order to significantly move the needle and improve our recycling includes really focusing on making it convenient for people to recycle glass without it going into the rest of the recycling stream and contaminating the rest of the recycling stream.
Yeah, like you were saying, broken glass, not exactly a recycling center's best friend.
The sad thing is that in a lot of the single stream systems, some big percentage of your recycling actually ends up in a landfill after all because it's been contaminated by the glass. And we don't want to do that.
Yeah, there's other great programs we're interested in getting started. I know a lot of people in the community here are interested in the other plastics, the number 3 through 7 plastics. Those are small volume, but a lot of them exist in households. Things like strawberry containers and salad packaging, things like that. So that's one that we would love to be able to offer. Textile recycling. There's a lot of old clothing that's no longer usable in the thrift market.
Yeah, definitely.
We don't need your old dirty old raggedy clothes, but that still has a big value as a fiber. And they can be turned into rags and lots of other things.
Yeah, well, and it's wild that you bring that up because I actually have about 25 or 30 T-shirts from camp that need something to be done with them. They're camp T-shirts that little kids wore all summer at camp, and now that camp's done, they don't have anything to do with them, and so they're sitting in a trash bag. And the last thing I want to do is throw all of that in a dumpster.
Right. Right now we sort of rely upon the Family and Intercultural Resource Center's thrift stores to do a lot of that for us, but it costs them a lot of money. And they have to sort through a lot of stuff just in order to find the things that belong actually in their store.
Yeah, well, and like I stopped short of dropping it off at FERC because I was like, oh man, I know that they're just going to look at this bag of shirts and say, we got to toss it. There's nothing to do.
We would love to be able to remove that fear from a lot of people and say, all right, if you have a question about it, if it's on the cusp, is this valuable, is it not? We'd like to be able to collect it and then let the FERC, or the FERC is the Family and Intercultural Resource Center, or one of the thrift stores, have a place that they can get rid of it without them having to throw it in the dump. So That way they can take the good items, put them on the shelves, take the bad items, put them in the recycling.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like, keeping the loop going instead of just ending the loop in a landfill, as so many times it does. Now, we were talking a little bit about the funding for recycling, and I wanted to get back to that, how funding for recycle right now is largely funded by trash collection fees, which is a weird way to set things up, because as recycling becomes more popular and people are throwing more in the recycle, that means less is going in the trash, which means they're collecting fewer fees.
Right. So we have a business model that doesn't really allow us to significantly move the needle without breaking the business model and not being able to fund the services anymore. The one other place that we get some revenues is from selling those recyclables that we collect that are actually a commodity, right? So there are some things that make us some money, but not nearly enough to fund an overall program the way that Summit County voters have told us they want to see funding. So other communities that we've studied with the help of a consultant have told us, they either fund through a sales tax or a property tax or some other funding mechanism.
Oh, more taxing.
Well, yeah, you bet. That's exactly what we did in 2014 so that we could provide people with services to get rid of their electronic waste, to get rid of their household hazardous waste. And people gladly supported that funding because they understand how important it is to have that service.
Yeah, and as progressive as we think we are here in Summit County, we trail the state in our recycling rates, and Colorado is at the trailing edge of the nation in their recycling. So we've got a lot of way to go, and we've got some easy pickings ahead if we can get a little bit more funding.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll get to those easy pickings in just a second. But I remember I did a piece not long ago about recycle, looking at exactly why Colorado isn't the best at recycling, and especially why a mountain community like this isn't the best. And when I was talking with HC3, the High Country Conservation Center, they were telling me that part of it comes down to the fact that we're a resort community. It's difficult to educate people who are here for only a week at a time on recycling. And the towns do a lot. The towns like Frisco, I think of Frisco Main Street, they've got recycle bins all up and down Main Street, but that's just one strip of land. Do you guys see that as well?
Yeah, I think one of the bigger challenges that we've got is we have a lot of units in Summit County that are condominium units, right? It's not like it's a single family home where there's a 2-car garage with room in the garage for a bunch of different bins, right? And so one of the things that we know that we've got to work on with the people that operate all of these different multifamily buildings is figuring out how we make it convenient for guests or anybody that lives in a multifamily residence to have access to recycling services.
Yeah, and the convenience factor, that's huge too, because again, in the end, it is it's trash. It's something that people don't want to put too much of effort into, which is understandable.
Yeah, I think people in the United States want to do the right thing. If you make it convenient, if you put the service there, if it's clearly labeled and understood, a lot of people will use the service.
I think another big piece of the issue with recycling here locally and in Colorado, the mountain communities, is the distance to markets for those recyclables. I know there's a lot of things that people think, oh, well, let's just recycle this, or why aren't we recycling that? And the reality is that there may not be a market available for that product in any proximity that makes any kind of financial sense. So we don't always want to go into this, certainly not as a money-making effort, because it's a giant loser. But it's important to the life of our facility here. It's important to the lifestyle of our community, and for the resources that it takes to produce these things. So markets that are further away cost more to bring the commodities there, and turns the whole thing on its head.
True, and again, it comes down to cost of transporting recycled materials and funding the recycling sites, and a lot of these other things that are behind the scenes that people don't see or think of when they think, well, why can't we just recycle? But we were saying that there are avenues that can be taken. There are some fixes. There are some ways to kind of reach the goals that we want. What are some of those?
Great question. I think number one is education and availability availability for people to recycle the way they would like to. So, for example, if we have glass collection around the county in more places, more drop-off centers for free collection of recycling is another good way to go. Availability and ease of recycling is what we find are the biggest ones. Those are the easy ones. The more difficult ones are educating the constantly changing population of people that we've got here. That takes time, takes good signage, takes good programs in our big facilities and around our communities to be able to do that.
I think the other big opportunity that we've got is to work with some of the large businesses, some of the large employers. So, Vail Resorts recently made an announcement that they've got a goal of significantly increasing their recycling and conservation efforts. So working with the ski resorts, working with Brett Grand Vacations, working with the school system, which we've already done some of the places where we get a lot of volume, right? That's low-hanging fruit in terms of figuring out how do we significantly increase the diversion rate from the volume coming out of some of these large businesses.
True, and like you were saying, Vail Resorts, largest employer in the county, Summit School District right behind them, Brett Grand, also an enormous corporation. And I remember we were at the COO breakfast, the kickoff to ski season, back in early October, and they had a talk from a vice president from Aspen Skiing Company talking about the power of voice and the power of political, change when it comes to something like recycle, changing or even energy, just in general, climate change. Changing light bulbs is a good place to start. Recycling is a good place to start. But what really needs to be done is these large entities like Vail Resorts using their voice, using their political power to say, all right, we're not doing enough. Yeah,
the good news is that part of this zero waste task force has been the ski areas. It's been some of these large employers, as well as all the towns, as well as the trash haulers. That's the other business that's just really important for us in terms of moving the needle and being successful, is working with the trash haulers that we have, right? Because there are significant costs to remove the things from your curb, right, and take it somewhere. And, they have to basically make a second visit in order to do curbside recycling. There's not a magic vehicle that you can throw trash and all of this different recycling into and not have contamination. So that's the other business that's really important to work with. Waste management, Timberline, Talking Trash, these guys are really important to our success.
Absolutely.
We saw very clearly that when Vail Resorts made that announcement, it got people's attention. And I think, and I know that Copper Mountain and Arapahoe Basin have been actively involved in this whole effort for years. The restaurant associations, the grocery stores are a little tougher. We're trying to get working with them a little bit more on food scrap collection. But what you may not know is that a lot of the restaurants and the resorts are already doing extensive food scrap collection that is adding to the compost that we're able to create here.
Really? I didn't realize that.
In the high country.
Very cool. Yeah, that's something that I didn't realize at all. So everybody's kind of getting together, collecting on this. Now let's talk a little bit more about the Zero Waste Task Force, kind of the goals behind that initiative.
Yeah, the Zero Waste Task Force was given two directives. One, we need to figure out a resilient financial model for not just the landfill, but all of our diversion efforts. And then 2, what are the additional services? What's the additional infrastructure needed in place in order to allow us as a community to then have those services where we can, instead of throwing something away and having it end up in the landfill, put it in the right place, and then have the funding to do something with all of that.
Great. Who all is involved in the task force right now? I know that we were saying, some large corporations around town. Who all else are big stakeholders?
Yeah, the resorts, the school district, another big player, both in the food scrap collection programs and others. But on the Zero Waste Task Force, we've got representatives from the haulers, the trash haulers and the recycling haulers, the school district, the resorts, the towns, and several members of town councils. The county and Thomas Davidson here is on the task force representing Summit County, and then a number of individuals who represent the community at large. And I'm sure I'm forgetting some people, but that's the sort of the bulk of who we're dealing with here, and we hope they represent a good cross section of the community. We've had several public forums to get input from the public, and it seems like we're all going in the right direction. It sounds like the community wants more availability of recycling, more diversion opportunities, and what we would love to be able to do is create the infrastructure, as Thomas was saying, to be ready when everybody decides they want to do food scrap collection. Do we have the capacity to handle that? So that's what we're in the process now of building up. We can't force people to recycle under current Colorado law, but we really want to make it easy for them to do that and make it easy for them to make the right choice.
The other important thing to know about the task force is that Summit County government hired a consultant, Resource Recycling Systems, to advise us, to advise the task force with regards to other communities in the United States. Well, they're familiar with recycling efforts beyond just the United States even, but some of the best examples of other communities and how they have significantly moved the needle. And so we've got experts, if you will, helping us with regards to the pathway forward.
Kind of who to follow to see what they've done and what they've done well. Can you guys think of maybe some of other communities that they pointed to or that they've worked with that have done a really good job, that have made recycling and zero waste part of their community?
Yeah, I think a lot of us can look around the country and we know we came from a community that had a great program, or we visited a community with a great program, and we see that, and we'd love to bring those ideas back. Austin, Texas, on the Front Range, we've got a number of great, Longmont, Loveland, Fort Collins. They're doing some real progressive work on keeping things out of the dump. So that's a big goal here. And
yeah, I think one of the things that's important for us is to look at some of the examples here in the state of Colorado, because as Thad was mentioning, there are any number of state laws that we either have or maybe more importantly don't have in terms of what we can do. And so right now, we pretty much are working with the carrot and not the stick.
Yeah, true. Well, and like you were mentioning, Thad, I think of places, I grew up in Colorado, so I've never had a system where I can recycle something and get paid for it. But I think of places like Michigan, where you did not throw anything. You didn't throw your top of your can away. You didn't throw your can away because that was money. That was 5 cents right there, or 10 cents, or whatever it is. Yeah, it's...
Those things have come and gone in the Colorado legislature. Those take big-scale decision-making, either nationally or on a state level, to make them really successful, the so-called bottle bills, where people get a refund on an empty bottle. Those can be very valuable, but as you can imagine, very complex to operate.
Yeah, you have to really think about whatever rule you write. Will people just follow it, or are you going to have to start spending a lot of money on enforcement? And I would rather spend money on providing services than spend money on somebody walking around enforcing rules.
True. We don't need somebody policing recycling.
Correct.
The last thing that I had for you guys was, as the county is looking at ways to improve, and as big stakeholders are looking at ways to improve, what can I do after my Thanksgiving dinner, later this week, to do my part? To recycle and to kind of fit into this, like we were saying, be like Vail Resorts and maybe use my voice or use whatever I can do to make this work.
Well, the first thing that I would say is we do have really good recycling centers, right? There's one outside of Breckenridge. There's another one in Frisco by the county commons. We've got bins in the parking lot at Dillon.
And those aren't going away. Those aren't disappearing anytime soon.
Correct. And we hope if we can get some additional funding in place, that we greatly expand those sites and those services.
Yeah, my recommendation would be let's not think about it as we hold the container and what to do with it, trash or recycling. Let's think about it on the front side before we buy the bottle, before we buy the plastic container. Is there another option? Let's look at those things on the supply side that reduce the amount of things that we have to recycle or that we have to decide to throw into the trash. So awareness would be my recommendation of what people can do is be aware of the things that we're buying and where do they go? Where does this thing go when I throw it out?
True, because you can't keep a manufacturer like I remember I was reading some news about the hot Christmas toys this year. One of the hottest Christmas toys, the whole idea is that you spend about 30 minutes unwrapping individually wrapped pieces of this toy. You can't stop a manufacturer from being wasteful in that sort of way.
Yes, we can. We cannot buy the product.
Exactly, by not buying that Christmas gift that requires you to throw so much trash in the trash, no matter what. And I guarantee you, not a single one of those individual wrapped pieces is recyclable.
Dad's right. There's a lot of choices that we can make when we're in the grocery store, when we're in whatever store that we're in. And yet, if you decide that you really need that thing and want to buy it, a lot of the things that you have, you can bring to our recycling centers, right? We hope to expand that list of services. I know that 3 through 7s is a big issue, so we would like to bring that service back. Those things are really hard to sell. It's going to cost us money to collect 3 through 7s and make sure that they don't end up in the Pacific Ocean or in the hands of Chinese children, right? Mm-hmm. But there is something that we can do with that. It's just that it's going to cost us some money. It's the right thing to do. It's just that it costs us something. So we as a society have to decide, are we going to fund these services? Are we going to put this infrastructure in place so that we all have an appropriate place to put all of these things that we don't need anymore without it going into a hole in the ground?
Yes, exactly. And there is no quick fix for it. It's going to take effort. It's going to take legislation. It's going to take changes, personal and large. And it's just the sort of thing that, like you said, it's going to take being personally responsible about what you buy and what you do with it after you buy it. Great. Well, Thad, thank you again for coming in. Thomas, thank you again, Phil, for coming in.
Thanks, Phil.
Appreciate you making time to talk recycling and trash in Summit County on Krystal 93.